Welcome to Now in the 90s, where we look at the game releases of 30 years ago today. This week, the misnamed Game Boy RPG sequel, a new Shinobi game, and an action space sim made for home consoles. Hi, I'm your host Jared, and today is September 1st, 1993. If there's one thing you can use to make sales, it's brand recognition. Released at the very end of August 1993, was Final Fantasy Legend III for the Nintendo Game Boy. Final Fantasy Legend III is a turn-based RPG. Walk around towns, talk to NPCs for information and purchasing equipment, and get into random battles. You start off with 4 human party members that you can rename, but also have the ability to recruit monsters to join your side. Get experience points, level up, travel through dangerous dungeons to defeat the evil primal water god, Zagor. Final Fantasy Legend III was developed and published by Squaresoft. It's also, rather infamously, not a Final Fantasy game. The original title of the game is Saga 3, the third in the Saga series, which began on the Game Boy in 1990, which was released in the West as The Final Fantasy Legend. That first one has name changed to capitalize on people's familiarity with Final Fantasy on the NES and the upcoming Final Fantasy II for SNES, scheduled to release in 1991. It's also why the gameplay is so completely different. Your human characters earn experience points and level up like normal, while your monster party members increase their stats based on how often they use certain commands in battle. Everyone can also upgrade themselves into cyborgs and eventually robots. The plot is weird, there's time travel involved and actual spaceships that can travel between different dimensions. It's the thing. Hilariously, the translation for Final Fantasy Legend III was provided by Square USA localizer Ted Woolsey. This was the first project he ever got to do translation on. Squaresoft showed him the final script of the SNES Final Fantasy II for the West and told him, no repeats of this mess. Previews for Final Fantasy Legend III were a little late on the draw. Magazine articles didn't start showing up until their September issues, like Electronic Gaming Monthly's issue 50 and in Nintendo Power's issue 52. It may also be the reason why it ended up being the lowest selling of the Final Fantasy Legend trilogy. It still sold well, especially in Japan, but it was much lower than the previous 2 games. Still, reviewers liked it, not knowing it wasn't actually a Final Fantasy game. Nintendo Power awarded it an average score of a 3.3 out of 5. Electronic Gaming Monthly gave it straight 8s out of 10 with the Editor's Choice Gold Award, and GamePro magazine gave it an average of a 4.4 out of 5. Western audiences wouldn't actually learn of the true Saga name until the PlayStation 1 release of Saga Frontier in 1998. Since then, Saga 3 did get a remake for Nintendo DS only in Japan, and in 2020, Square Enix released Collection of Saga Final Fantasy Legend for the Nintendo Switch eShop. It includes all 3 Final Fantasy Legend Game Boy games, the first time these games got a complete port. Speaking of third games, the Sega Genesis also got their trilogy sequel. Released at the end of August 1993, was Shinobi 3 Return of the Ninja Master. Shinobi 3 is a side-scrolling action game. Play as the ninja Joe Hayabusa, running, jumping, and slashing your way through armies of ninjas. Get special equipment to use like kunais to throw or powerful ninja magic. You can sprint to move quickly and can now jump off of walls. Become a true ninja master and defeat the rise of the evil Neo Zed. Shinobi 3 Return of the Ninja Master serves as a direct sequel to the previous Sega Genesis game, The Revenge of Shinobi, which that is a direct sequel to the arcade game, Shinobi. Unlike the previous games, Shinobi 3 didn't want to be difficult. Well, at least until like the last level. Instead, it wanted to put an emphasis on ninja speed. It's one of the reasons why you can now sprint along the ground, and is also why you have levels where you're speeding along on horseback. And on other stages, you're zooming around on a surfboard, becoming a true surf ninja. Hey, wait a minute. It's also a very different game than it was supposed to be. Shinobi 3 was originally set to release in 1992 and got so far as to have review copies sent out to outlets. But Sega was not happy with how it turned out, so they put it back under development crunch. Special moves were changed, levels redesigned, graphics made better, and it was made to play way faster. Incredibly, the original beta version had its ROM dumped online, making it available for anyone to try out and see the differences. It may have taken several extra months, but what came out the other side was one of the best games on the Sega Genesis. Review outlets loved the finished version. GamePro magazine awarded it a 4.75 out of 5. Electronic Gaming Monthly gave it 9 out of 10 with the Editor's Choice Platinum Award. Shinobi 3 was put onto the Nintendo Wii's Virtual Console and onto the Nintendo 3DS's eShop, both of which are no longer in service. The next Shinobi game in the series would be on the Sega Saturn in 1995 with Shinobi Legions. The series would then lay dormant until 2002 with the PlayStation 2 reboot named Shinobi and its 2003 sequel, Nightshade. Then nothing again for another 8 years until 2011 with Shinobi for the Nintendo 3DS. An expansion pack turned standalone sequel for maximum profit, released onto the Super NES, was Wing Commander: The Secret Missions. Wing Commander is a space flight action game. Take control of a space fighter and get into space dogfights with the enemy. All the action takes place in first-person view right from your cockpit, complete with all the ship status right on the dashboard. Fly freely in space to track down enemy combatants, blast them down, and enjoy heavy bits of story between levels through detailed animated cutscenes with lots and lots of dialogue. Stop at nothing to defeat the evil cat people of the Kilrathi Empire. Wing Commander began as a game for MS-DOS computers in 1990 with the same kind of gameplay. Wing Commander Secret Missions is an expansion pack for that game, which was ported onto the Super NES rather impressively well, I might add. The first game was also ported onto the SNES in 1992, and Secret Missions was just released as a standalone game for full price. Wing Commander for computers was considered a massively innovative game. It basically set the standard for space dogfight games, paving the way for games like X-Wing and TIE Fighter. The intricate story was also revered, especially since it had branching paths depending on player decisions during combat and digitized speech. The original DOS version was so good that reviewers were actually awarding it scores like a 6 out of 5. The Super Nintendo port of Secret Missions doesn't have most of those things, only a single storyline and definitely no speech. But it does have impressive use of Mode 7 graphics and being a faithful recreation. It also has lots of slowdown and choppy gameplay. It's hard to say how much people liked it then. Nintendo Power was favorable in their review with an average score of a 3.7 out of 5, which is pretty high for them. GamePro magazine awarded a 4 out of 5 in every category. However, Electronic Gaming Monthly had every single reviewer give it a 5 out of 10 because it's not as good as the original. Wing Commander would continue to get new games, mostly on PC, up through 1997. To give you an idea of how popular this series was at the time, does anyone remember the 1999 live-action Wing Commander movie starring Freddie Prinze Jr. and Matthew Lillard?
To fight a new breed of enemy,
What is this thing?
Earth's last hope is a new generation of warrior.
Lieutenant Christopher Blair.
Todd, Maniac Marshall. I got 2 bogeys coming in hot.
Let's do it.
Freddie Prinze Jr., Matthew Lillard, Wing Commander.
I love this baby.
Anyone? As for everything else that you hoped you'd forget about, here's Editor Dylan.
John Madden Duo CD Football is the best looking Madden game we've seen on the show so far. The visuals and audio have noticeably improved, but how does it play? No, seriously, because I didn't play it. My emulator's been giving me some sass lately and I couldn't be bothered to troubleshoot. But if I had to guess, I'd say it probably plays identical to the last Madden game I talked about. And speaking of games I didn't play, World Series Baseball released on the Game Gear this week. I don't even have an excuse, my Sega emulators work fine. I just chose not to play it, and you know what? It was liberating. I should do that more often. But looking at the footage, I could confidently say it's a good baseball game on the Game Gear. If you like playing baseball games on the Game Gear. Nailed it. Bram Stoker's Dracula, released on the NES, the SNES, the Game Boy, Not You, and the Genesis. The game, of course, is loosely based on the movie, which is loosely based on the book, which is loosely based on Castlevania. It's a standard side-scrolling action game similar to First Samurai. Most versions are basically the same, not very fun and kinda generic. That is until I tried the NES version, and surprisingly, it was the best one. It looks and plays similar to the NES Castlevania games, but you could run faster and jump ridiculously high. Took me a bit to realize you can hold down while mid-air to do a ground pound, or butt bash as some people call it, which broke away into the caverns below. It's pretty cool. I recommend it since I'm pretty sure most people skipped it thinking it was the same as its next-gen counterparts. Jurassic Park released on almost everything in August, so we'll cover them all this week, with the exception of the SNES version, which comes out in November. I think. There's some contention between Jurassic Park fans over which version is better. Jurassic Park on the SNES is a top-down action game where you play as Dr. Grant. Occasionally, there are some first-person shooter segments where you blow up dinos with rifles, grenades, and actual rocket launchers. Jurassic Park on the Genesis is a more traditional side-scroller akin to Flashback. You're still Grant, only this time you're armed with dinky tasers, sleeping gas, and tranquilizer darts, which is more true to the character, but I think SNES seems to be the best version of Jurassic Park. I asked Jared which one he thought was better, and without hesitation, he said definitely the Genesis. I asked him why. He said, and I quote, "You can be Raptor, so it's the best one." Can't argue with that. 13 games released on these 6 consoles this week in 1993. I don't play every version of a game release each week. I usually choose one, play it a bit, and try to find better footage online. But sometimes there would be completely different games with the same title and release window, such as the case with Thomas the Tank Engine and Friends from last month. I chose the SNES version, and I gave it my typical thorough and of course professional synopsis. It's baby's first button push make noisy pictures move on the big square. But according to you guys, the Genesis version offers so much more, like racing and even exploration. So thanks for keeping me informed with your comments, that I'm sure are totally unbiased and very factually accurate. But let me know if there are any other games that are wildly different on other consoles, and I'll do my best to give them a mention as they release. Hope you all have a fantastic weekend. You too, Jared.
Thank you, Dylan. Here in the Collector's Corner, Final Fantasy Legend 3 isn't too bad on its own. It released with a retail price of $39.95. Now, the game alone is at $30, but a complete one is tough to get with that Game Boy box, the manual, and the original poster map, which is all worth $128. There is also an alternative Sunsoft published re-release version of Final Fantasy Legend 3 from 1998, which is worth a little bit less than the Squaresoft ones. Shinobi 3 released costing $64.95, and now the game alone is only $24, though complete one is worth $77. Sadly, SNES owners didn't care about Wing Commander. It also released costing $64.95, and now you can easily get the game for like $10. A complete in-box copy barely scratches $40. And that's it for today. Next week, Mario's Got a Gun, a Hudson Mascots explosive SNES sequel, and whoever wins, we lose. I'm your host, Jared, and this was Now in the 90s. Thank you so much for watching Now in the 90s. I want to thank some patrons like Christina Rose, Skizzy, and I can't believe this is a real patron name, Dylan is the best editor ever. Please like the video and leave a comment down below, especially if you played any of the games we mentioned this week, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you already are a subscriber, thank you so much for watching this show every single Friday. I love doing this show because it lets me talk about games I wouldn't get to in any other capacity. I loved Wing Commander as a kid, the original DOS version. I was so impressed by all the flying and the graphics and how the game would actually talk at me. I also didn't know what I was doing as a kid, and I kept shooting my own allies, and they got mad at me, and I could never understand why.